You know, most of us have dreamed of finding a hidden treasure in Grandma's attic, be it the first Superman comic book in mint condition, maybe some rare coins, a priceless piece of art. One Plano man believes he stumbled onto a piece of rock and roll history worth millions. Tonight, Jeff Curley is in with his special report. Jeff?
As you know, it's been 50 years since Elvis first burst on the scene, and his earliest records are available at any CD store. But Steve Lawrence of Plano thinks he's found half a dozen Elvis songs the world has never heard.
You knock me down, slap in my face, slapping my name all over the place. Anything that you want to do, but honey, hey, home,
History says it all began in Memphis in 1954. A young Elvis Presley met up with Sam Phillips of Sun Records, and rock and roll was born.
This is Fernwood Avenue. This is where my uncle lived. They moved in here in about 49 or 50. And right here to 158 Fernwood Avenue, they built.
But Steve Lawrence believes the history books got it wrong.
This is where I believe it all started. I believe some of the beginnings of rock and roll started right here in this garage.
Steve says his uncle's garage studio, known as Fernwood Records, offered studio time to the country, blues, and rockabilly hopefuls running around town in the early 50s. When Steve's uncle, Slim Wallace, shut down the studio decades ago, it just faded into the family folklore. Until Steve asked his cousin a casual question at a family reunion 3 years ago.
Met my cousin Ronnie there, and we were talking, asking about the old Fernwood label, if anything was left. And he said, well, there's some papers, there's some boxes. I said, what's in the boxes? He said, well, some tapes. I said, studio tapes? He said, studio tapes. And that's where it began.
Did your heart start beating?
I tell you, I was flabbergasted. Inside, I knew what was on there. Somehow, I knew there was something important.
Sure enough, a dozen two-track reel-to-reel tapes had somehow survived half a century of neglect. And when Steve made digital copies of the tapes, this is what he heard.
You know I can be found sitting home alone.
I heard the most incredible young voice with the quality of voice that Elvis had.
Was it the king himself?
Don't be cruel.
It sure sounded to Steve like a young Elvis Presley playing around with a very early version of a song that would later become one of his most popular hits.
Oh, gee, baby, I hate to leave your kiss.
Steve's cousin Sue Wallace says she knew Elvis and introduced the boy who would be king to her father, the founder of Fernwood Records.
He hung around probably for a couple of weeks, and he'd join in with the band. He'd sing the songs.
I hung out there. And
Sue's younger brother Ronnie was just a small child at the time, but he says he remembers watching Elvis record music in his dad's garage studio.
I just kind of stayed in the corner and enjoyed the music from there. Since we recovered this from storage, it's bringing up all these old songs that never been heard before.
Pressed in a scrapbook page.
Elvis was in Ronald Smith's band in the early 50s.
You played with Elvis. You know Elvis's early voice. Is this Elvis on the tapes?
If it wasn't Elvis, it was his brother. I'll just put it that way.
Baby, rolls my heart.
So is it Elvis Presley on those tapes? We took the tapes to a forensic audio expert for what amounts to audio CSI. Find out what he has to say when Fox 4 News at 9 returns. So, did Steve Lawrence of Plano find a hidden treasure in a long-forgotten garage recording studio in Memphis? Specifically, is the voice on the tapes Elvis? Or did he find something even more valuable to rock and roll history?
Well, why should we be apart? I really love you, baby. Rolls my heart.
Is it a young Elvis trying to find his style in a song that would later become a huge hit?
Come on over here and love me. You know what I want you to say.
That would be great, but I'll let you look at these. These are quite old.
Hoping to get an answer, Donna and Steve Lawrence go to Herbert Joe.
They were in some cardboard boxes. on a shelf in an old shed out behind my uncle's old house.
He's a forensic
where they had
audio
been for
expert
years.
with Yanovich and Joe in Dallas. They specialize in tape-recorded evidence.
Is this original?
That is original.
He carefully takes a small clip from the front of each reel, cautious not to destroy any music.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do is to examine the chemical composition of the tapes, because tapes over a period of time had different formulations.
The tests on the composition of the tapes won't be completed for several weeks. But Joe has done a thorough analysis of the singers' voices. He studied distinguishing vocal characteristics, including pitch, range, vibrato, and timbre. He compares a known Elvis recording of Don't Be Cruel to the one from the old garage studio in Memphis. He isolates single words, like the word found.
But if you look at the yellow lines here for the word found, compared to the known found in the same song, it's significantly different.
Finally, it's time for an answer.
We've made a determination that it's highly improbable that any of the six are of Elvis. Nice songs, somebody else, but we do not think that any of those are Elvis.
Okay.
For a second opinion, the Lawrences take the recordings to Stanley Oberst, an Elvis expert who spent years studying the King's early music.
In my opinion, it's not Elvis. No.
Okay.
The Lawrences are obviously disappointed. But then, just out of curiosity, the Elvis historian listens to some of the other recordings recovered from those old tapes. They appear to be black artists.
That's worth, you know, probably to a lot of people more than than finding an original Elvis cut.
You see, in the segregated early 50s, there weren't many places for African Americans to make recordings.
There was very few places that black music was accepted.
But they could come to Fernwood Records. Elvis historians say he was heavily influenced by black musicians in Memphis to create the sounds that would later become rock and roll.
They built this into a studio.
Steve
My
Lawrence
uncle
now
and
hopes to
Jack
put out a
started
CD of the long-forgotten music recorded half a century ago in his uncle's garage. No, he didn't find the King, but he just may have found early rock and roll royalty.
The Lawrences aren't put off by the fact that they didn't discover the early King on these garage recordings. In fact, their greatest challenge now, frankly, is trying to find out who is on these tapes. In those boxes, there were no labels or written records, which may mean many more trips back to Memphis to play these tapes for rock historians. Jeff Crilly, Fox 4 News.